So good evening, and thank you for tuning in for Chamber Live. I am Christine Kernan, Vice President of the Princeton Mercer Regional Chamber, and I'm pleased to have as my guest this evening, Scott Borsack, a very well-respected attorney with Szaferman Lakind right here in Mercer County. Scott and I will be discussing navigating the Paycheck Protection Program, vital information for our business community. Scott has more than 33 years of experience representing clients in a variety of transactional matters. Scott routinely is called upon to structure a variety of transactions to minimize burden of federal and state taxes. Scott has worked with clients and their advisors to bring tax efficiencies to mergers, acquisitions, and more. Welcome, Scott, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you for having me, Christine. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, this is great. There's so much information for us to cover, and the Paycheck Protection Program is so complex, and I'm sure that you will be able to help our viewers navigate this process. So why don't we just get started? And I know your firm has been on the forefront of providing education and advice to business owners about the Paycheck Protection Program. How did you get started in this rapidly changing area of law?
Well, that's a very good question. When the pandemic started, my firm created a small task force of 6 attorneys who were tasked with the responsibility of tracking what Congress was doing to provide various relief measures to individuals and small businesses. And the first 2 relief packages were really guided toward some tax provisions and some unemployment relief, the so-called pandemic bonus. It wasn't until what some call Phase 3 that the CARES Act was enacted, and that had a bit of a rocky road bouncing back and forth between the Senate and the House of Representatives. But by the time Mitch McConnell and the Senate majority had framed out the CARES Act, we had pretty much scoped out the various opportunities available to small business owners. So we were pretty much ready to hit the ground running. And when that act was signed, we tried to get the word out to as many people in our immediate community as we can. And that kind of grew into some regional seminars, and we've had people contact us from as far away as Alaska and California. So we've been on this now going on 7 months and have been working with hundreds of people and advising thousands of people.
That's unbelievable. I mean, it is hard work, and really this Paycheck Protection Program, because it is so complex, having to get up to speed like that really quickly, that's amazing. Congratulations. And I know you're helping a lot of small businesses. So I do see that the SBA has changed some rules very recently about what some borrowers have to do in order to get forgiveness. Can you tell our viewers exactly what the SBA has done?
Well, this is a particularly good time for this presentation because, as you say, last week, the SBA did change the rules somewhat. For those borrowers with loans of no more than $50,000, they don't have to be concerned with 2 of the primary tests to determine forgiveness. They don't have to demonstrate that they had the same number of what are called full-time equivalents during their spending period after the loan originated. They also don't have to demonstrate that those individuals who are employed with them during the first quarter of 2020 received at least 75% of the pay that they would have earned on average during the covered period as compared to the rate that they got in the first quarter. So with 2 of these big compliance hurdles removed, the SBA put out yet another application. Now there are 3 applications for forgiveness. And for those with loans of $50,000 or less, the borrowers need to demonstrate that they spent the money on eligible expenses, but they don't have to qualify for these tests. And again, this is significant because there's about 1.7 million borrowers out there with loans of $50,000 or less. So the reach of this administrative guidance is significant.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds unbelievable. I know that there are some confusion about how long a borrower has to spend the proceeds of the PPP loans. Can you tell us, is that 24 weeks, 8 weeks?
Well, when the CARES Act was first passed in the early spring this year, borrowers were given in the original legislation 8 weeks from the day the loan funded to spend the money on eligible expenses. The Act refers to that period as the covered period. This past summer, Congress passed the Flexibility Act. And in the Flexibility Act, they extended the covered period to 24 weeks. So they made it another 16 weeks longer. Now, that is of particular benefit to the borrowers who couldn't open in March and April and May because of social distancing requirements and the stay-at-home orders that the states were issuing. For a borrower whose loan originated before June 5th, they can elect on their forgiveness application to take the shorter covered period. So you can elect to go 8 weeks. And there were a number of borrowers who were in essential industries who had no problems operating and were able to pay their employees. So there are quite a few borrowers who will elect the shorter 8-week period.
Okay. All right. Well, it's great that there is that option now, though, for the business owners. When do borrowers have to submit their applications for forgiveness?
And again, the answer to this question was also changed by the Flexibility Act. Originally, borrowers had 6 months from the end of the covered period to submit their application for forgiveness. And if a borrower didn't submit the application in 6 months, they had to begin making payments of their loan. So the Flexibility Act changed that, and now borrowers have 10 months from the end of the covered period to begin to repay the loan. So with a 24-week covered period, roughly 6 months from the day the loan originates, plus another 10 months to get all the paperwork together, there's really 16 months now from the time the loan originated for a borrower to submit their application for forgiveness.
Yeah. Oh, that's good news, because I think people need this kind of time. I mean, the pandemic has really hurt the small business community, and a lot of them are not even open yet for business. So that's helpful to know. Some borrowers seem to be in a hurry, however, to file their applications for forgiveness. What do you advise there?
I've been advising borrowers that they should not be in a hurry, and I think there is potential for this process to be made even easier once we get past election season and we find out who is going to have their hands on the levers of government in 2021. There have been several attempts, really since the end of the summer, to get the Senate in particular to bite on a Phase 4 relief package known as the HEROES Act. In the HEROES Act is a provision that will grant what amounts to check the box forgiveness for any PPP borrower whose loan is no more than $150,000. That would make the process of forgiveness even easier. Don't produce any documents, don't go through any of these tests, just check a box and certify you've done everything correctly. There are tens of millions of borrowers who have loans under $150,000. So I think the process becomes easier if Congress gets back to legislating instead of engaging in these cross-party battles. The advantage to the borrower is the process gets easier and they don't have to face questions from their lender or the SBA, particularly in this $150,000 category. So plenty of reason for the smaller loans to wait. There's also provisions that I guess we'll talk about eventually that were in the Flexibility Act that the SBA has not promulgated any regulations on. And in order to use those provisions known as safe harbors, you've got to wait until after December 31st.
Yeah,
So
I was going to ask you that question.
we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but we'll get there eventually. So to use the safe harbors, you've got to wait as well. So our advice to borrowers has been, let's get through this year and then reassess what the regulatory climate looks like in January or February. Nobody should be in a rush to jump into forgiveness.
Okay. And so you mentioned the safe harbors, or did I miss it? What can you tell the viewers, what are those safe harbors? Or did I?
So there's two chief safe harbors that came into the law under the Forgiveness Act. One has to do with a borrower whose business has suffered a financial downturn in the pandemic period, which the safe harbor identifies as February 15th through the end of the year. So the borrower first has to demonstrate that their level of economic activity has been adversely impacted by the pandemic. And they have to demonstrate that the reason for that impact has to do with health and hygiene regulations that were put into place to deal with social distancing and trying to limit the spread of COVID-19. So a business that was impacted that way, combination of reduction in economic activity as the result of those regulations, will be excused from the application of the full-time equivalent test. But in order to get there, you have to demonstrate that the downturn persisted until December 31st. The other safe harbor has to do with an inability to hire enough people, again, persisting through to December 31st. So if a business has made reasonable attempts to replace staff, but can't do it because people are afraid to come back to work, or there's a shortage of labor in a particular area, those borrowers won't be penalized either, but they have to wait until December 31st to demonstrate that those conditions still persist. The questions around all of this is, what exactly does the borrower have to do to demonstrate that they've made attempts to hire? Is it enough to run help wanted? Do we have to use listings on online classifieds like monster.com? How long do we have to make those efforts? Do we have to find people, just anybody to come in, or is it a person who's particularly qualified to handle the tasks we're trying to fill? So those are some questions on the manpower issue. On the business downturn, we have this very large question of what constitutes an adverse impact on your business. Is a 10% reduction in revenue sufficient? Does that number have to be 30%? How long does it have to last? Do you have to be in that spot? If your economic activity was down 30% in the end of the second quarter, into the third, beginning in the fourth, but by December 31st, if you look at week over week, if you're down only 20%, does that take you out of the safe harbor? We don't know. And we don't know because the SBA hasn't put out regulations on this point. Now, I'm guessing that because borrowers have to wait until December 31st to use the safe harbor, that the SBA is waiting until sometime in the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, to come out with these regulations, because nobody can use them until after the first of the year. But those are some important places that we're looking to see what the next steps are.
Oh, well, yeah, this is really good. A lot of confusing information right now, but unbelievable. I think that, they're going to have to wait till maybe even the new administration comes in to get more clarification. Oh, well, I understand that there are also limits on how much compensation paid to an employer or employee rather for the purpose of securing this forgiveness. Do those limits apply to the business owners too?
They do, and the business owner has an additional veneer of limitation. In applying the various tests and limits on use of funds, borrowers can't compute their forgiveness on salaries of employees in excess of $100,000 per year. So the rate at which an employee gets paid is important in determining the forgiveness. So in an 8-week covered period, no employee can be paid more than $15,385 PPP funds in order to secure forgiveness on the payment. Now, that's not to say the employer can't pay the employee more than $15,385. They can pay whatever they like. But for purposes of figuring out how much of the proceeds were spent on eligible payroll, the per employee limit in 8 weeks is capped at $15,385. Now, if the employer is using a 24-week period, the salary cap is $46,154. Basically, what SBA has done here is said $100,000 divided by 52 weeks gives us $1,932 or so a week, and have done some simple math. But that's for the ordinary employee. The owners have got a additional, as I suggested, veneer of limitations that they have to deal with. Generally, what the SBA is going to say here is that an owner can't be paid more than a fraction, the numerator of which is 2.5 and the denominator of which is 12. That's basically 20.8% of their 2019 compensation from the business, and in any event, no more than $100,000. So the employer limit for owners is about $20,800 in a 24-week period. In an 8-week period, it's still $15,385. So the rules get pretty complex, and when we start looking at what employers can take credit for their own health insurance and retirement, the rules get even more complex. But we can certainly provide guidance to borrowers on a one-on-one basis for some of these situations.
Yeah. So you brought up the health insurance benefits. So the benefits that are paid by an employer is that included in the wage limit for the purpose of forgiveness?
No.
No.
No. So for purposes of determining the spending eligible for forgiveness, the amounts paid to the employee do not include the employer's contribution for health insurance and retirement. So that in an 8-week period, that $15,385 is just gross wages that were actually paid to the employee.
Okay.
The benefits are in addition. That's a good spend, but it's not subject to the compensation cap.
Okay, good. Good to know. Okay, so will there be another round of PPP loans? There are so many businesses out there struggling, some which never received a PPP loan in the past. I know you mentioned that there's a HEROES Act. Is this where that's going to be included? And if it happens?
Well, Christine, this is my favorite question because I always answer it with a question. And I ask people, well, do you have a crystal ball? And if you do have a crystal ball, tell me what it says, because I have a lot of questions. Honestly, I wish I knew. In a perfect world, given what the small business owner and the medium business owner and the closely held business has gone through in the past 7 weeks, Congress would look at the circumstances and say that through phase 3, we had done a lot. The PPP had its problems, but it clearly propped up a number of businesses, particularly family-owned businesses, and that sector of the economy is still in tremendous trouble. In a perfect world, Congress would put aside their partisan differences and get to the business of legislating. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world right now. And while I have faith that Congress is going to get back to its business of legislating, I don't know when that's going to happen. Everybody left Washington to focus on re-election. You know, as a constituent, I would ask a member of Congress, how could you have left Washington with this still on your plates? You're now more concerned about getting reelected than taking care of the people back home. There has to be another round of stimulus. I only hope it comes soon enough to help those business owners who are really struggling, because there is a lot of hardship in this economy right now, and it's not getting any better. And phase 4 would make things better.
Well, thank you, Scott. I mean, yeah, lots of really great information. Couldn't agree with you more with your last comment. So let's hope that they do get down to business and come together so that we can help the small and medium-sized business community. But thank you again for being with us tonight. I know there's a lot of information that we covered. Scott, we will be providing your email and your phone number, etc., for our viewers, so they can reach out to you for questions, I'm sure, if they have any. Scott?
Yes, absolutely. My mailbox is full to overflowing with emails and questions. You know, as I said when we started today's interview, we've done, I think, 10 or 11 webinars. In total, I've had thousands of people tune into those, and those programs are all available on our firm's website, www.szaferman.com. I do spend a lot of time answering questions. We've been hired by hundreds of new clients to help them with the process. We've been involved in the process from determining loan amounts to developing spending plans, and now working with borrowers to resolve questions on the forgiveness process. And, you know, just because you've submitted your application for forgiveness doesn't mean that the process is over for you. Lenders have got 60 days to make considerations of the application for forgiveness. The SBA is going to be auditing loan packages to make determinations for those loans over $2 million, whether a borrower should have gotten the loan in the first place. There's going to be a myriad of disputes that come out of this process as to the amount determined for forgiveness, whether the loan was proper in the first place. And we're going to be here to help borrowers get through this process, to come out on the other side, to secure the greatest amount of benefit that can be taken from this Paycheck Protection Program. So keep the questions coming. We're going to be here for a while.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for being with us tonight and for all this really great information. Before I conclude, though, however, I do want to thank our production sponsor, Eagle Steady and New Jersey Buzz Productions. If you have not, or if you're not familiar with New Jersey Buzz, I highly recommend you following them on Facebook. I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you join us on Tuesday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. for our next Chamber Live. Thanks again. Have a great evening. Be safe. Stay well.